Hi, welcome. It's Friday, January 27th. Though there are about 10 chapters to go here before we reach the end of Job, we are getting near the end. In fact, in today's reading, Job's going to make his final appeal, his final plea, and tomorrow we'll see another character enter the scene who will spend 6 chapters addressing Job and his situation. We'll be ready then for the finish. Really what probably by now all of us are anticipating, and that is God's response. I've read Job before and I've read what God said, but this time, going through it verse by verse and chapter by chapter, I'm anticipating that so much this time. It's kind of like a script or a movie where everything's building, the tension continues to rise, and we're all getting to that point where we can't wait to hear God finally speak in this situation. Now, you remember in yesterday's reading, Job remembers when. He kind of looks back at the good times before everything that's happened to him takes place. He remembers being on top. He remembers being king of the hill, people loving him, everything working well for him, having a loving family and caring for others, and everything he touches turns to gold. And, in a sense, it's kind of like when we remember the good old times, and somehow when we do it, we're always thinking back to something that used to be and in reality probably was not that good at the time, but somehow it just seems better now. In Job's case, though, those good times really were good. They were great, in fact. So he's thinking about that, and then all of a sudden we get to chapter 30, and reality hits him again, and that pain and suffering, which is always right there with him, gets a hold of him, and he's back into the depths of it. And as he is, he now is going to one last time lay out his case and do it a little differently this time, and offer up if-then kind of scenario. If I have done something wrong, if I have committed this sin, then here I deserve this punishment. And he's going to go through an entire catalog of sins here. Not just the external kind that we commit or we do, but rather even the internal kinds of things, the very spiritual requirements of the law, not just the outward kind of requirements. Job ultimately here is going to be saying, either I have done something, and if so, punish me, which he is convinced he has not, or what then is happening to me must be some sort of mystery that I don't understand. He's really gotten it down. Even after his friends have talked to him and he's gone back and forth, he's really come down to those two things, and he wants to know. And all of this leads me to several things today that I would share with you. First, I'm wondering if you can think of a time when you were at the top in anything and then hit rock bottom. And I was trying to think back in my own life. It could be a job, it could be an activity you had done, it could be health related, anything else. And I go back to younger days and being able to play sports, whether it was soccer or basketball or softball or anything. There was a time when I could get out there and at least compete with anyone. Not the greatest, but comfortable at a high level, run and jump. And now, as I'm getting older, about the only thing I still can play is some soccer, and the young guys are running circles around me. Now, to be sure, this is not like it happened yesterday. This has taken years to get to this point, but all of a sudden, it's like the reality of that hits me. And I understand that to a certain level. I think of some athletes, especially, due to the nature of the physical body breaking down, and can happen pretty rapidly. Athletes who are at the top of their game playing professional sports, and then all of a sudden, nothing. I'm sure it's difficult. I'm sure it's a struggle. And then it hit me, even as I was thinking about that. Well, what about Jesus? And number one, to go from God, being with the Father in heaven, to humbling himself, to becoming one of us, coming down to earth, and going through everything that we go through. But as Isaiah 53 points out, ultimately suffering, even worse than Job, Isaiah 53 says, "He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. As one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised and we esteemed him not." Later on it says, "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb led to the slaughter." Those words really describe, in fact, they kind of mirror some of the words that Job has spoken about now, people that he would not have even looked upon, who are outcasts and are outcast by everyone else, now look at him in that same way. That's how low he has fallen. And so he's come to the end of his rope, and he's listed all of these sins. And the comforting thing here, before I go on, is that we were promised that Jesus is well acquainted with our sorrows and our struggles and our suffering and our pain, because he went through it. He went from that triumphant Palm Sunday entry into Jerusalem, and in just a few short days, to the point where he is nailed to a cross, and people are yelling and shouting at him and have totally turned away from him. He knows what that suffering and pain is all about. The other thing is that I was beginning to think about Job a little bit, stepping up here and saying, okay, if I've done this, then I ought to be punished with this. Would you be willing to do that? Would I? I'm thinking, there's no way I would try to stand up and say, if I've done this, or if I've done this, or if I've done that. It got me thinking, wow, he must feel like he's pretty righteous. But then I remember back to the first chapter, and the truth is, we are told Job was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. He was a righteous man. Job has learned, though, that God's justice is not like human justice. Good does not always beget blessing, just like evil does not always find itself being punished in this sinful earthly world in which we live. And the question now becomes, is that something we can accept? Like Job, this truth should raise a question for us here today. No matter how righteous a person might be, he or she is still subject to God's grace. Can I accept the earthly reality of suffering and pain and my own weakness, falling wholly on God's mercy and forgiveness in Jesus Christ, the Redeemer? That's really the question. You know, many people think Job is just about suffering, and they try to pull all sorts of stuff out about suffering. And true, there's much in there about that we can take away. But really, the reality of Job is about, do I fear God, and do I fall prostrate in front of him, seeking his mercy and his grace and his redemption through Jesus Christ? That's where God is at, and that's where God asks mankind to be at. And it doesn't matter whether you're Job and righteous and upright and blameless, or whether you're the worst sinner. The same is still true. And that's the reality we're faced with, and I think we'll find out in the coming chapters that that's how God approaches Job. Certainly some questions to ponder today. I hope you're having a great day and not suffering. If you are, my prayers are with you. Remember, God is with you. Have a great day, and I look forward to talking with you again.